in a more rigorous way. So this is why UNCF, Education Post, and the Urban League came together to collaborate on this report. All three organizations were actually involved in doing this research to hear from the African American community to really inform their advocacy and strategies. So this report is therefore rooted in the experiences of the Black community. So UNCF provided data from, national survey data from 1,300 Black parents and caregivers and over 600 grass top leaders regarding their thoughts on K-12 education issues, as well as in-depth focus group data. Education Post provided national polling data from 1,200 Black parents and grandparents, in addition to focus group data as well. National Urban League provided survey data from over 600 African Americans regarding their perspectives on the Common Core and K-12 education issues. Now, across the board, African American parents, leaders, and voters told us that education is of utmost importance to them. They want their children to attend and graduate from college. However, sometimes we know there's barriers to achieving that goal. But they do want the tools to help them better their education for their students. And some parents also told us, quite frankly, that they were tired of the negative tone in education as well. They too wanted a better narrative. Secondly, the report suggests that building a better narrative involves promoting and investing in high-quality reforms and initiatives. Despite some views that the African American community is not informed on key education issues, our data show that that is definitely not the case. So the majority of African Americans in our sample support high-quality standards with the Common Core state standards. Many parents support high-quality assessments when not administered in excess. And like we've seen in other studies, African Americans overwhelmingly support high-quality educational options. Now, thirdly, we suggest that building a better narrative involves not only underscoring some of the inequalities that we've seen, but also truly celebrating some successes that we know are apparent in our African American community. So to that end, in the report, we discuss a few African American-led systems, schools, initiatives, and programs that are making great strides for African American students. So for example, we highlight Achievement Prep here in DC and Urban League's Project Ready program. And then here in DC, we also talk about some of the transparency issues that we've seen with the equity reports. Here and across the country, parents are wanting greater equity and more access to data to really understand their students' progress. So also, in addition to some of the programmatic efforts that we discussed, we also know that it's important to highlight excellent Black scholarship. So in addition, we underscore the research like that in the Journal of Negro Education, research centers such as the Urban Education Collective in North Carolina, and other similar places where rigorous Black research can thrive. And lastly, which is more so of a call to action, we suggest that building a better narrative entails promoting the urgency of now. So we know when urgency isn't paramount, complacency can occur. So we really must act now for our students, which is why we're all here, and which is why all three organizations collaborated to come together on this report. Now, at the end of the report, we highlight various recommendations for multiple stakeholders to help transform the educational trajectory of our students. Essentially, we ask that policymakers, funders, parents, congressional leaders be unapologetic in their advocacy for Black students. Amongst other recommendations, we ask that community leaders and organizations partner with parents to share tools and best practices. For funders to be intentional in reaching out to diverse, equity-minded education reformers. For parents to really use their voice to advocate for equitable policies and practice. And for all of us to really ask some of the tough questions, such as, are these communities that these policy decisions are affecting part of the policymaking process prior to these decisions being made? What are some of the unintended consequences of these policy reforms? And are the data systems in place disaggregated by race and transparent enough to make informed, equitable decisions? So again, we hope that you read the report and disperse amongst your networks, but also that you use it as a tool to create better conversations and build a better narrative for Black students. Again, all of our research and work is rooted in an unapologetic advocacy for our students. So we want, again, if you're interested in following our work and future projects, please give us your information in the survey at the end of the report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Susie Saavedra. I'm the Senior Director for Policy and Legislative Affairs for the National Urban League's Washington Bureau. The Washington Bureau is the policy research and advocacy arm of the Urban League. We were established 50 years ago to give the National Urban League and the communities we represent a presence and a voice before Congress and the administration. I'm responsible for directing and overseeing the Washington Bureau's policy team in developing public policy priorities and advocacy strategies that advance the National Urban League's economic empowerment and civil rights agenda. Over the past couple of years, our education team and I were very intimately engaged in the congressional debate around reauthorizing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, now known as the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, debate here in Washington, D.C., and making sure that our communities had a seat at the table and that our collective voices were being heard in this debate. Today's report is an important tool to advance equity and excellence at scale during the implementation process. So we at the National Urban League look forward to our continued partnership with UNCF and the Education Post in the coming weeks and months ahead. I now have the distinct pleasure of introducing my boss, Donald Cravens Jr., the National Urban League's Senior Vice President for Policy and the Washington Bureau's Executive Director. Don brings a wealth of federal, state, and local policy, political, and legislative experience to the Urban League. He served in the Louisiana State Legislature, both in the House and the Senate. He was also the staff director for the United States Small Business Committee here in D.C., and a chief of staff to Senator Mary Landrieu, serving as the only Black chief of staff during that time. To top it all off, his background as the deputy political director of AIPAC has been extremely instrumental in guiding the strategies and tactics used within our own advocacy work here at the Washington Bureau. So without further ado, I introduce you to Don Cravens Jr.
Thank you, Susie. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It is a pleasure to be with you today. I am so honored to have been asked by Naomi to make this introduction. I get to introduce you to the Marc and Mike show. And I was so ecstatic when she asked me to do it. I said, I'm going to wear my best suit and my little pocket square because I want to look nice when I introduce these two distinguished gentlemen. But seriously, it's very good to be here today. And I'm going to introduce you to our host today, Dr. Michael Lomax. Since 2004, Dr. Lomax has been president and CEO of UNCF, the nation's largest private provider of scholarships and other educational support to African American students, and a leading advocate of college readiness. Under his leadership, UNCF has raised over $2.3 billion, and I was in the elevator with him a few minutes ago, and he was asking his team, how much money have we raised today? And he's helped more than 92,000 students earn college degrees and launch careers. Not just get jobs, but launch careers. He has worked to provide educational opportunities for African Americans, but also other students of color as well. Before coming to the UNCF, Dr. Lomax was president of Dillard University in New Orleans, Louisiana, and a literature professor at UNCF member institutions Morehouse and Spelman Colleges. He also served as chairman of the Fulton County Commission in Atlanta, the first African American elected to that post. Now, Dr. Lomax is very involved in a lot of things. He's a current member of the President's Advisory Commission on Education Excellence for African Americans. Don't know how you do it, Doc, but you serve on the boards of Teach for America, KIPP Foundation, Smithsonian Institution's Museum of African American History and Culture, the Studio Museum of Harlem. He's also the founder of the National Black Arts Festival. And this didn't surprise me one bit. He's also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Expected that. Oh, sick. In his spare time, he spends his time reading fiction and history. He's an avid book collector as well. He has over 500 first editions of African American works. He says he is addicted to tennis, Mr. President, addicted to tennis, and he has been described in Ebony magazine as Venus and Serena groupie. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Michael Lomax. Yes, sir, please. All right, thank you, Doc. Joining Dr. Lomax today for this discussion is Marc, the second person on our panel today. Marc Morial has been described as an entrepreneur, a lawyer, a professor, a legislator, a mayor, the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and now CEO of the National Urban League, the nation's largest civil rights organization. Marc has served as the president and CEO of NUL since 2003. He's been mayor of New Orleans, served as mayor of New Orleans from 1994 until 2002. And if it had been up to the people of New Orleans, he'd still be the mayor of New Orleans. He was a Louisiana state senator when I first met him in 1992 and served 2 years in the United States Senate. As I said, he was president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors from 2001 until 2002. He is a graduate of University of Pennsylvania, where he received a degree in economics and African American studies, and also a distinguished graduate from Georgetown University Law Center here in Washington, D.C. Marc is equally busy. He serves as an executive committee member of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, the Black Leadership Forum, Leadership 18, and is a board member of the Muhammad Ali Center and the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. He has been recognized as one of the 100 most influential Black Americans by Ebony Magazine, as well as one of the top 50 nonprofit executives by the Nonprofit Times. Marc he loves history, he loves arts, music, and sports. He talks about football. He was happy when football season started. I hear about it often. Big Saints fan. He has an adult daughter and is married to broadcast journalist Michelle Miller, and they have 2 young children as well. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present to you Mr. Mayor Marc Morial. And a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated too. I forgot to say that, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, yes.
Don't get me in trouble. I was the college president. I supported all the fraternities and all the sororities.
But then there is the first of all.
Well, and then the president of Alpha Alpha in the room. So what do we do? President have a reward. So.
We're in your house.
Well, but who's asking the question?
We're asking each other questions.
Oh, okay. Oh, we're gonna do.
Yeah, we're asking each other. So
Okay.
I'll take the first
Are you?
shot there.
Yeah. Well, you gonna ask yourself a question?
No, I'm
Marc?
asking you. I'm gonna put you on the spot.
No, I'm gonna take it. It is my house. I'm gonna do it first. And I'm not gonna answer the questions that were prepared for. I want to have an honest. I do want to have an honest conversation because first of all, Marc and I have been friends for a very long time. I was one of his constituents when he was mayor of New Orleans, and I know what a difference he made in that position. And when he left New Orleans to become president of the National Urban League, I left shortly thereafter. So he's the senior, although I'm older. He is the senior. He'll let me say that. He is the senior executive of a national organization. And I said to Marc, how honest should we be in this conversation? One of the conversations that he and I would have, and we would have when Ben Jealous was the president of the NAACP, and we'd be on these calls or get these emails from some of the African American leaders around the country who would say to me, or would say to us, why is it every time I see a conversation on the national news about education in the Black community, I don't see leaders from the African American community engaged in that conversation. Where are you? What are you doing? And why aren't you on that show? Well, I didn't get invited to be on the show. But I think part of what we're saying here today, and I really want to just spend a little time with this, is that UNCF issued a report a couple of years ago, done to us and not with us, around education. And this is not accusatory, but it really is that this is such an important issue in our community, and to suggest that an organization with the rich history of the National Urban League, the NAACP, or the United Negro College Fund, that we are not deeply engaged in education, and that there aren't other organizations that are. So I want to hear this.
Here's the thing. The so-called ed reform movement really began on the conservative side of the political spectrum, in truth and in fact. It was conservative think tanks and others that began to think of new models which fit into the framework which was very popular in the 80s around, quote, privatization. And the fundamental notion of a lot of those movements was that government was essentially the problem. This is a Reagan narrative of the 1980s, which won 3 presidential elections. That narrative was central, and that narrative is central to the modern conservative political movement in America. And the key business model of the early reform movement was this idea of taking a public school away from total control by a school district or central office and creating a model which allowed for, I would call it, site-based control through a board that can control. So what did that model allow? It allowed people who were not necessarily elected, not necessarily from that particular community, to participate in the governance of right? And that movement began. So key to that, the conservative political movement of the 1980s and 1990s was also the exclusion of African Americans and other people of color, right, from the discussion in any meaningful, systematic way. I often say that what the charter school movement essentially did is took 2 interesting ideas that were popular in the mainstream educational policy arena, one being site-based management. How many of you remember the site-based management movement, which was very popular? Dr. Smith, what, in the 80s? Mainly in the 80s. We need to give more control to the leader at the site, the principal. And that had support, not necessarily in the conservative movement, but it had support in the black community. It had support amongst black educators, because at the time, black educators were struggling against whether central offices, which were not diverse, were concerned about an individual school in the black community. The second principle that the charter school movement kind of took over was the concept of community schools, which was also a really 60s. You know, you go back to the 60s, you go back to the Bay Area, you go back to Oakland, you go to the 70s. We need community schools. So what did that really mean? We need people in the community to sit on a board, on an advisory board, have a say in the operations of this school. So when you think about the charter school model, what it allows is an independent board, but doesn't require it to be from the community, which enables site-based management, meaning a principal, right, or the governance of who the teachers are, what the curriculum is, what decisions are made, is not being made by a central office, but it's being made at the site. I think it was deliberate and intentional to exclude, right, African American leadership and African American educators in those early days and up now into the present, because your premise is the reform movement in America, the faces of it who are in the public domain on mainstream television talking about it have historically not included historic African American organizations with a commitment to education, with a commitment. Now, I'll say this, and then what we have tried to do is say that our approach to ed reform is akin to a third way. It's not just traditional, and it's not just reform, because we blend the idea of accountability with the idea of equity, the idea of excellence and standards with the idea of equity. We don't want to go back to a time of no standards. That's what you had down in rural Louisiana and Mississippi. You know what no standards meant? The 5th graders were using second grade textbooks. That's what no standards meant. That was the system you had in old school. You know, we're just black community. You get the old books, teach what you want, and so the system was not based on standards. So all that to say, I do think that there is no doubt, but I try to give a little bit of a historical dynamic of what created the current situation. So today, I think with the browning of America, with the change in, you cannot have success in closing the achievement gap, in educating every kid, unless the people of the community are at the table. And they're represented. I'm not a leader because of, quote, I'm a leader because I lead a national organization. Right? I have a following in a constituency. It's an institution. It's not me personally. So that's a little bit of framing. Doc.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, that the way that this issue was approached, which was a salvation approach, we're going to come in and
save,
and save a community which is in crisis, which has no assets, which is, completely, where there is no outrage around educational.
Are you quoting the presidential candidate?
I'm trying not to actually, but I think that what that failed to recognize is 150 years of African American leadership and getting us where we are today. I mean, it's, to say that historically black colleges have played the question I always get, do we still need them? And ask the 250, 300,000 students who are attending them every day whether we need those institutions. Ask their alumni, ask the leadership all across America who are grounded in these institutions. But in addition to that, my position is, to your third way, we are critics of the status quo because the status quo is not acceptable. I mean, traditional large systems are failing our students. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing good happening there, that there are not innovations there, that there are not programs that we think should be expanded and replicated. But this isn't an either or. This has got to be selecting the best from both and also innovating and finding new ways. And part of that has got to be to engage the people who have the most at stake.
And Doc, I embrace good schools.
Yeah.
If a school is educating kids and getting a result, I want to lift it up. I don't care if it's a union school or a non-union school. I don't care if it's a charter school or a traditional school. We should lift up what works in good schools, because the challenge is not to find good schools. The challenge is to scale good ideas and strategies that work, to scale them up so that they touch every single institution. And that's what we, I believe, continue to struggle with. How do we scale it up? Is the money there? Is the resources there? Is the will there?
Well, and let us just note, and so we both you have deeper roots in New Orleans than I do, but the New Orleans that I knew before the storm, because I was there before the storm, it had indigenous charter schools that had been started by African American educators. So the community was innovating and trying new things and producing different results than the traditional schools were producing. I think everyone would accept that there were too many failing schools in New Orleans at the time. But the question is, why is it that those innovators and the work that they were doing have not gotten the same recognition and support? And that's why this evening, you'll be hearing from a charter school founder and director in Washington, D.C., who has been doing this work. I'm like you, I'm agnostic. I don't care whether this is traditional, whether this is charter, whether this is, what I want to know is it producing results with the kids that we need to have the results produced with? I want to make one other point, that a lot of what I see happening with what is called innovation, character education, all that, this is not new in the African American community, and part of the reason why it resonates, why so many African American parents are sending their kids to that, is because those are the schools that were the foundation for historically black colleges. The schools that were doing this same character education, immersing young people after the Civil War in education, giving them the tools to be citizens, to be employable and economically independent, and to be people of faith. Because one of the things that our people wanted to do was to be able to interpret the book that meant the most to them, which was the Bible, to tell the truth about who they were and what they had the potential to be. And so that how can we talk about a community which has built and sustained black colleges and black elementary and middle schools in the face of segregation and opposition for over 150 years, and say that this community does not have an interest in education?
I want to do something. I want to put our hands together for the report writer.
Yes.
Yes.
Marriage.
It reads well. We've got to help you distribute it, get the word out, and also for all who collaborated, because it appeared as though it was a very impressive team of people who did a lot of work. I want to ask you something, because I think it's important. So the United Negro College Fund has historically, in its roots, been there to support higher ed, particularly private, historically black colleges and universities. Why is it important for the UNCF to get involved in the debates around K through 12 or pre-K through 12 education? What's succinctly describe and talk about?
Real simple. Our goal at UNCF is to increase the number of African American college graduates. Period, paragraph. And so if that's the goal, and now to increase their meaningful employment upon graduation, by the way, as well, to work on. But if you say that that's the goal, then the question is, how do you get there? Well, you don't get there by focusing on the 12th grade. You don't get there by focusing on freshman year. You've got to say, how do we ensure healthy educational opportunities for these potential college graduates starting at pre-K? So we reverse engineered, and we can't do everything there, but we can say to our community and to others, if you want to get this goal, you got to start working with this child at the age of 2 or 3. I mean, you can't wait until later. And if you want this youngster to be the next coder and engineer of the 21st century and create the new app that is going to produce the new wealth that is going to improve our the world, then that preparation has to begin in elementary school. And you've got to hold them to high standards, and you've got to teach them to what they have the capability of achieving and challenge them at every point. And the point I would make is what we hear from our parents, whether they are low-income parents or moderate-income parents, is they want their kids challenged. They want them to they want them to work hard. They want them to get the knowledge that they need to compete and have a better life than the parents had. Because that is what we want. And I don't hear any black parents saying, well, we don't want our kids to take tests. We don't want our kids to be in tough classes. We want all that, and we want them to be good. But that means that we have to have the investments made in our community so that our children have the same quality facilities, the same quality instructors, the same academic opportunities that a wealthy child has.
So, you asked the question earlier, because I think we all rhetorically sometimes get asked, are historically black colleges and universities, we get asked, it was a prevalent question back in 2003, what's the continued relevance of historic civil rights organizations? It was asked a lot in 2003, and then it was asked again in January and February 2009. When the president was elected. Isn't it time for you guys to just fold your tent? You basically won. You got your man in the White House. So aren't you no longer relevant?
Right.
And I think what I say to people who tell me this about black colleges and universities, I simply say, have you ever visited one? I say, see, it's like green eggs and ham. You're saying, you're opining on what you don't know. You're giving an opinion about what you haven't experienced. And I think that is revealing and eye-opening. Now, secondly, We participated last fall in the release of a longitudinal study by Gallup on recent college grads. And one of the findings of the report is that African Americans who finished an historically black college or university had a greater affection, affinity, and rated their college experience far higher than African Americans that had gone to a mainstream university. And it was interesting because it surprised the researchers. But we know in reality, I went to a majority school. I went to the University of Pennsylvania. I had a great experience there, but in the campus environment in the 70s, there were frat houses on Locust Walk that on Halloween night had effigies of a Ku Klux Klan's wizard hanging from the window of the dorm. So, you know, we all know that the experiences in a mainstream are going to also include feelings of tension, exclusion, discrimination that go along with it. But I think it's important that we have to affirm. The other thing I'm going to say about historically black universities, I had a conversation, just so happened I was making a fundraising call on a business person who was Egyptian American. And he said to me, I need to ask you something. He said, how is it that you all created over 100 historically black universities when essentially you all were living under an apartheid system?
Right.
He says, I'm trying to get my head around how you all pulled that off, because I look at it as really a remarkable accomplishment. And he said, and you have these organizations. So he cites the National Urban League and the United League. He says, you know, what prevailed on people 100 years ago in the depths of oppression to create these organizations, and they've lasted, and they're still sustaining. It makes you step back and really recognize the brilliance of people in the post-Reconstruction era and how they responded and what people did. Yes, part of creating black colleges and universities was the white religious movement and wealthy white philanthropists who had a good intention. Part of it were states who were creating and enforcing a system of separation and legal segregation. But one thing in this country is when you have institutions, right, you don't shut them down just because someone says they're no longer needed. These institutions are needed now more than ever.
And let me just say, there is no people without their institutions. You know, do we really need black churches? Do we really need black families? Do we really need? I think those are the logical extensions. And I want to make when somebody who will remain unnamed said some things about our community and that what they were deficit sort of expression. You talked about one attitude in our community, that we are a community of strivers. And I've never met so many folks who are moving on up. And working real hard to move. I'm working double jobs to move on up. And the moving on up is not just to get something for themselves. It is always to advance their family. But I thought there was another side of our community that was also very important. We are strivers, but we are uplifters. There is a tradition of uplift in our community, and that the striver has to reach back and uplift someone else. And the great organizations that exist in our community, whether it's the National Urban League or the NAACP or the NAACP Legal Defense Fund or the United New York College Fund, are really striver/uplift organizations. They're giving opportunity to ambition, but they are also placing responsibility and obligation on those who succeed to help the rest of our community. And there is no issue it's hard when you are a community that has faced so much of this apartheid regime to say what's the single most important issue that is the lever. I spent my every day thinking about improving the educational opportunity for a student, because that really gives her the tools to do this for herself. But we have to be a community which builds wealth. We have to be a community that builds assets. We have to be a community that challenges laws which are opposing our ability to achieve. And so really it's not any one of them by itself that is the be-all and end-all. It is what we do as a community working together to ensure that we are addressing all of those obstacles and clearing the way for the strivers and the uplifters to move more.
You know, it's interesting because we're having this conversation about education, and in the political campaign we're witnessing, the discussion and the debate about education is missing. It's not a part of it. It's not a component of it. That's why I would like to see the way the debates are framed and conducted changed significantly. For example, if you think about the primaries, there was literally a debate every night on the Republican side and then later on the Democratic side as it went down to two. The candidates got an opportunity to mix it up several times. They're going to only be 3 debates. Each of them is 90 minutes. One's completely devoted to foreign affairs. It doesn't leave a lot. I'd like to see 5 or 6 one-hour debates. Focus one exclusively on education and kids. Focus one exclusively on health care. Focus one exclusively on urban issues. Force the candidates to come in, and then you get beyond talking points. You get beyond distilled narratives. You get an opportunity for them to come in and talk about what their plans for the country is, because as important as the research, all the polling, our great sense of things are, I will be surprised if there's more than 1 or 2 questions in all of these debates about either elementary and secondary or about higher ed. And that is something wrong with that not being a part of this. So we know our good friend Lester Holt is going to be the moderator of the first debate. Let's flood NBC with letters and emails, and maybe we should write a letter to him, Michael, together, and say to him and the people there, we demand that there be a conversation about children and about education in this debate.
And,
What do we demand?
Yeah, and I'd like to add another side to that, because I think that this is crying out for, obviously, political leadership. But I want to make a plea to another side of our sector, which has been actively involved in the investments that have been made in changing pre-K through 12 education, innovation, and bringing in the charter movement, new ways to bring teachers in and all that, which I think has, I argue with those folks, but I will say some of those are great schools and producing some great leaders, and we have had that right here in Washington, D.C. Kaya Henderson is a Teach for America alum, and I will put Kaya Henderson up against anybody. I know she's got somebody here from the team. Yes, but Kaya is, I think, the greatest school chancellor in the United States of America today, and I'm going to say she's going to be one tough lady to replace, because she has taken, to your point, she's taken the best of the traditional and the best of the innovative, and she's brought the best for the youngsters of the District of Columbia. I want to make one other point. I want to say something to American philanthropy, because American philanthropy is something that does not exist anywhere else in the world. You've invested billions of dollars in innovation and new models for teaching Black and brown children. And I think you've helped to move the needle. But I'd also say to them, if you had engaged our communities differently, there would not be resistance, there would be embrace. And that I'm gonna challenge American philanthropy to read this report and the earlier report that UNCF done to us and not with us, and say, if there is going to be a new starting point this year, let us approach this work differently and not have it be winners and losers and challenging the intentions of organizations, but really focusing on how do we work together. We can't succeed as a nation if everybody's in an armed camp looking over the wall and shooting at the other guy. We're going to have to find some way of working together and advancing the cause. And as a lifelong educator, coming up on the 50th year of doing this work, I'm going to tell you, teaching is hard. It's darn near impossible to do, and there's magic, and you don't understand when you're succeeding. But it is even harder when there's contention all around it. We've got to do this as a nation together, as opposed to a nation opposed. And so I want to thank you, Marc, for your leadership. I want to thank the National Urban League. I want to thank Ed Post. And I want to thank the tremendous team at the Patterson Research Institute and our advocacy team here at UNCF for figuring out how to work together and produce a powerful report that really articulates what we think the problem has been, but also suggests a solution. And so I want to thank you, Meredith, because you really told it and did a great job. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.